Good morning, and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim, as we continue our journey, A Prophet in Babylon, Chapter 13, Part A. Gaunt left the church by his vestry door and walked rapidly through the deserted streets to Central Park. He felt an imperious need of solitude. Not then could he have spoken even to those who most shared his intimacy. He was realizing that in all the great moments of life, whether of triumph or defeat, lover and friend are put far from us. Hitherto his course had been largely shaped by others, by Palmer, by Gordon, by the practical but daring counsels of his wife. He had been conscious of a force not born within himself that had carried him whither he would not, a wind of God that had taken him up and borne him afar. He was conscious of all that still, but now he resumed the capacity of his own soul, and with a sense of awe and utter humbleness he realized that henceforth he must guide others. He was appointed leader, and he sought the baptism of solitude for the strengthening of his spirit. The winter sunshine filled the park. The air was crisp and sparkling. Already the faint footsteps of advancing spring could be heard, as one who hears beneath the ice the flow of living waters. His own mind caught at the parable. The ice of convention, which had long imprisoned his heart, was breaking. The living waters of new faith and purpose were rising. A gush of thankfulness, which was almost ecstasy, flooded all his nature. Hope, an angel with furled bright wings, walked beside him, talking with him in a joyous language. To men upon the brink of great battles, God allows such hours, for without them great battles could not be fought. Ecstasy visits men but rarely. It is the sacramental wine God keeps for great occasions and the sacramental feasts of life. Gaunt drank of it now and tasted its divine inebriation. He trod on air. His feet were among the stars. Failure seemed impossible, conquest certain. And if success came, it would not be his. He was but the vehicle of some higher power. His warfare but the vindication of mighty strategies designed long since in the council chambers of the infinite. He rested in that thought, conscious of his entire relinquishment of self. Henceforth he was a surrendered man, his life a surrendered life. In the eternal rhythm of things he had found his place. No longer would he know the vain perturbations of life, or enmity, or inordinate desire. Whatever happened, he would not know them, for he had found the peace that passeth understanding. The battle might go ill or well, but for him the issue was assured. In the meantime, the sensation created by Gaunt's action was immense. "It is a dreadful mistake," said Tasker in lamentable voice. "If he had only consulted with me." "He's intoxicated with vanity," said Small in angry tones. "Madison Square Garden, indeed! You mark my words, he won't attract 100 people, and it holds 20,000. "He's mad," said Roberts vindictively. "I told him so long ago. I saw it coming, warned him. The church will never recover from today's disgrace." All over the church people gathered in groups discussing the affair. The verdict appeared general that Gaunt was mad. It was the bigness of the scheme that stunned them. Had Gaunt merely resigned to accept another call, or to enter on some evangelistic work upon a humble scale? They could have understood it, but the idea of Madison Square Garden, of a league of service which was meant to absorb all churches and supplant them, overwhelm them? There were others, however, to whom the very bigness of the idea was its attraction. Within an hour of the close of the service, there was a hasty editorial discussion in the office of the most influential newspaper in New York. Its editor had been one of those who had heard Gaunt speak. "He will go far. He has a great idea, and he believes in it," was his outspoken comment. He was a man accustomed to handling big questions in big ways. In public life of New York, no man exercised such influence as Butler of the Daily Light. By many he was accounted cynical, by others unscrupulous, but no one ever doubted the singular penetration of his judgment. He possessed in its extreme development that journalistic sense, a kind of sixth sense, which discerns instinctively the course human thought and events are likely to take. Again and again he had taken up causes which seemed insignificant and unpopular, and in a few weeks had made them the burning questions of debate throughout the nation. As he listened to Gaunt that morning, he had again discerned such a cause. He was not religious in any conventional sense, but like most intellectual men of his caliber, he took a deep private interest in religion. Those who called him a cynic had often been surprised to find in his editorials a kind of prophetic note, which seemed wholly at variance with his caustic and biting style. The fact was, his cynicism was but the reverse side of his moral earnestness. He knew too much of the seamy side of life to have much respect for men and their motives, but perhaps that very knowledge made him all the more vigilant to discover a man whose motives were really pure, and all the readier to welcome him. He had gone to hear Gaunt that morning in search of a sensation, but the simplicity and directness of Gaunt's address had charmed him and then set him thinking. He had expected the usual commonplace of the religious enthusiast. He had heard them too often to attach much value to them. They were almost always the fruit of ignorance and fanaticism. But here was a man who had genuine ideas, as he soon perceived, ideas based on wide and clear deductions. He listened with the interest that any intellectual man has in the exposition of real ideas. The leaves of his own life were turned back. In the first flush of his youth he had been attracted by the ministry, and had been designed for it by his father, himself a famous minister. But he had sorrowfully confessed that there was too much in his father's life to make the idea of ministry attractive to himself. He had seen his father persecuted for heresy, suffering all kinds of humiliations at the hands of little and ungenerous men, triumphing over them in the end, it was true, but at what price? He had died at 50, worn out with long contention, and it was at his father's deathbed Butler had renounced the ministry. He entered the eager world of journalism, rose rapidly, and at 40 occupied the editorial chair of the Daily Light. But his interest in religion had never left him. He had struck many hard blows against mere religiosity, but never one against religion. And now, as Gaunt spoke, he found his own early ideas of religion miraculously reinvigorated. A church wholly freed from creed, wholly based on service? Yes, he had once imagined such a thing possible, a thing to dream of at least, and here at last was a man who believed in it not as a dream, but as a practicable reality. There was another thing, too, which attracted Butler. He knew better than most men, for from his desk he had touched the centers of thought in every country. How true it was that in every country there was a revolt against organized forms of religion. The legions of that revolt could be counted by millions. What if the time had really come to interpret this revolt, to rescue it from the cold shadows of negation, to weld the idea into a vast constructive force? What if the man had come at last capable of this crusade, a crusade which would appeal to all the thinking people of America, and not of America alone, but of all the lands not heathen? His blood thrilled at the thought, and then ran cold with caution. The supreme journalistic sense was now thoroughly awake and vigilant. He was tempted to play for such tremendous stakes, but he must be sure that he made no error in his judgment. He listened to Gaunt with the keenest criticism, weighing every word, watching every gesture, absorbed in the endeavor to read his soul. He satisfied himself of Gaunt's sincerity and the dynamic force of his ideas. But there still remained one question. They were big ideas, but could he interpret them in a big way? Then there came that abrupt announcement of a League of Service, and a movement which needed nothing less than the vast auditorium of Madison Square Garden for its inauguration. Butler's heart shouted at him. He saw at a glance all the possibilities of the new movement. He felt, rather than recognized, the advent of the psychologic moment. He will go far. He has a great idea. I believe in it, he said, and I will support him, he added. That was why there was a hasty editorial consultation in the office of the Daily Light, while Gaunt was communing with his soul in Central Park. "Give it headlines and 2 columns at least," Butler said. "I will write an editorial on it. This is the biggest thing that has happened in a generation, I tell you." "No bigger than the insurance scandal, surely," said the sub-editor. "Pooh! That only touched men's pockets. This touches their thoughts, themselves, their souls. In a month's time, nothing else will be talked of, from here in New York to San Francisco." The incredulous sub-editor went away endeavoring to fortify himself with the recollection of other occasions on which his chief had proved mysteriously right, when everyone else had supposed him wrong. Then Butler sat down to write his editorial. It was a striking editorial. Everyone acknowledged that the next morning. It was one of those perfectly balanced pieces of reasoning and generalization which can be achieved only by trained skill, at its highest point of efficiency. Yet it had heat in it, a flame of passionate conviction, all the more impressive by being restrained. Butler noticed with a grim pleasure that at all events he had not misinterpreted the sensational value of the incident, for 3/4 of New York's papers gave full reports of Gaunt's address, with more or less sympathetic comments. Yet it must be owned, Butler was not without certain qualms of misgiving. He knew too well the levity of the New York mind, its strange caprices, the rapidity with which it enthroned popular idols, and the recklessness with which it forgot them. It came to him suddenly that it was 10 chances to 1 that Gaunt was not the sort of man who knew how to organize victory, and this was a case in which victory must be organized. He resolved to see Gaunt at once. It was late afternoon when Butler arrived at Gaunt's home. He found him seated at his library table with Palmer, and both men were busy over an immense pile of letters and telegrams which had arrived since the morning. Gaunt hastened to thank Butler for his article, commenting on its generosity. "Well, it's about that article I have come," said Butler. "You will not need to be told that I agree in your position, but we are only at the beginning of the battle, and if I am really to help you, I must have some knowledge of your plans of campaign." And we'll stop there. Next week we'll pick up with Chapter 13, Part B. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.